Yo, what's up, guys? Here is a public service announcement for y'all. A little chat. Do not let your suffering, your hard times, go to waste. That's the first thing. And secondly, if you don't have any hard times or suffering, make them for yourself. All right, so let's talk about the first one real quick. So, things are hard. You got a lot of temptations before you. Maybe your marriage is hard, whatever, girls, family relations, job, whatever it might be, man, whatever it might be. Do not let that go to waste. Think about it this way. You can lean in to all of that hardship and all of that suffering and think about it this way. That suffering, that hardship, if you let it, it will crush you and it will grind you down and you will be destroyed. And probably some people that want you to suffer want to see you destroyed. They literally want to see it out of envy, which that's why envy is a terrible, disgusting sin. Because envious means they don't want you to have it. But what you can do with that suffering too is you can lean into it. Okay? You can lead into that grinding. You know what you can do with a grinding wheel? If you move correctly, you can sharpen a sword. But if you just put that sword there, it's just going to, if you just leave it in the same place, it's going to cut your sword in half, that grinding wheel. So think about it this way, guys. All of those suffering times in your life, all those issues, all those things you got to conquer, spiritually or vices, whatever they may be, start to lean into the suffering of it to start forging you and your character, right? Think about it. That's going to harden you. Don't think about it as crushing. Think about it as strengthening you. It's just like working out. What do you do when you work out? You don't take burdens off. You put burdens on and you push against the burdens. The same thing. God's sending you these burdens. Some of them you probably picked out yourself because you're a moron. And I know a lot about that. I know a lot about vices. I know a lot about doing dumb things. So those things you get rid of. But the other tough times in your life, you move in and you let it strengthen you. Like putting weight on a barbell, like getting your sword sharpened. As long as you move that sword, it's going to sharpen it. Okay, guys, you need to start doing that. Thank God for all of those trials that are in your life. Thank God for your tough time. Thank God for your tough job. Thank God for all of these things. Thank God for being hungry, right? I mean that like sincerely. You could view it two different ways. You can be hungry and at the end of it, you're just going to suffer and just be hungry. And that doesn't help anybody. It doesn't help you. It doesn't help your character. It doesn't help. It just defeats you, right? Crushes you. Or you can thank God for that suffering, for being hungry, because that hunger will get you out of that hole. So your vices, start to rid yourself of those vices. And the other suffering that is kind of in your control, but not technically completely in your control, it's from God. Start leaning into those and carrying that weight and working against it to get stronger. I'll say this. You talk to a lot of people that went through tough times, especially men who went through war. Some of the best times that they had was in the suffering times. They look back on those times as very fondly. They don't talk about some of, like the atrocities that went on, but the rest of it, that having purpose and that suffering gave them something to strive towards. So think about it. Just like you're in a war or in a battle, because you are, this is all a spiritual battle. It's all warfare. It's all a spiritual realm, right? You got to grind through those things, move through them, get rid of the vices that you can, move through the rest, let them strengthen you. And you will look back on those times happily. That happens. You won't think about the entire time it's completely happy. You'll remember how tough it was, but you'll think about how happy you were having a purpose to get through those times. All right, next, let's talk about bringing in voluntary suffering. If you got too much pleasure in your life and you have no purpose, then you got to start bringing in suffering somewhere. So I like bringing in suffering through fasting, right? Just bring in like the hunger pains, bring in stuff that's hard, bring in going to the gym, bring in the extra sets, bring in what you could do. Anything, any type of denial to help you suffer. Because I know that sounds crazy, guys, but if you have too much pleasure in your life and too much ease and you're not suffering, you're going to get unhappy very, very quickly. Men need purpose. They need suffering. They need, the war, the spiritual battle, vices to battle, virtues to battle and get, not battling virtues, so to speak, but, battling to gain those virtues. You need something to fight towards, fighting towards following the commandments, fighting towards being perfect. That's why religion's so important, because God's calling us to strive for perfection even though we will fall short. That striving for perfection gives us something to do. That striving for the next generation, raising your children, working through marriage difficulties, whatever it might be, that striving gives you purpose, and that purpose gives you, that striving gives you suffering, purpose, and that'll make you happier in the long run. I promise you guys that. You got to start flipping the switch on your suffering, thanking God for that suffering, thanking to have your eyes open to even see that suffering and be able to carry that burden appropriately and be made stronger by it. These are great, great, great blessings. Great blessings. If you view them that way, if you view them the other way, you are crushed and you are all done. And that's no way to live. So let's talk about awesome suffering. So, the Jews, Moses leads the Jews out of Israel. Now, those guys were all, even though they were slaves, Moses leads the Jews out of Egypt. My bad. Moses leads the Jews out of Egypt, out of the quote-unquote flesh pots, ease. They were slaves, but at least they had food, right? And they're complaining about it the entire time. They're not suffering well. They're constantly making a big deal about it and whining about it. And God sends them blessings across the way. But that generation, because they spent 40 years there, that generation of pleasure seeking, wanting to go back to Egypt, wanting to go back to being slaves just so they could be fed, just so they could be comfortable, even though they were slaves, they want that back. But 40 years eradicates that population, right? So the kids that are born to those marriages and everybody that was made after that, they grow up in the wilderness. And when you grow up in the wilderness during tough times, that makes you extremely tough. And those were the folks that crossed into the promised land. The ones that had to grind it out the entire time and had no memory of pleasure. There was no turning back. There was no turning back in their minds because they didn't know it. They didn't come from having their bellies fed and being slaves in Egypt and being at least comfortable and having a home and all that. They didn't have that at all. They grew up warring and they grew up suffering and they grew up hungry. And that's what you want for your next generation, guys. So think about that. Think about how God treats people. That's how God chastises. And in his chastisement, we thank him for it because it perfects us. It perfects the next generations. It causes a great striving for perfection. And when you have that, you can conquer a lot of different things. You think those guys, that generation, had vices like that? You think they had terrible vices, attachments to pleasure? No, they didn't have any of those vices because that generation before them had those vices and that generation died out. That generation had vices because they were comfortable, because they didn't have suffering. And you need suffering. Men need suffering. So that's what I have to say about that. That's it, guys. Subscribe if you like this stuff. If not, don't subscribe. But the only way that the channel grows or any of the messages get spread is from you guys. Like, I just put it out. You guys spread it if you find this valuable. Subscribe, like, make a comment, whatever. I don't even like saying that but it's for the algorithms, because Google and YouTube, you know this, guys. If you don't kind of react to the video, if you don't share it, if you don't comment on it, if you don't like it, if you don't subscribe, the algorithms don't work that way. And secondly, whenever there's a man on YouTube talking about taking personal responsibility, God, not living by the way of pleasure, those videos always get pushed to the bottom. So help me get pushed to the top so more guys can start to take responsibility and live good, striving, virtuous lives filled with purpose and suffering. Out.